Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the MMA Corner News Show. I'm your host, Josh Davis, alongside my co-host, featured columnist at the MMAcorner.com, Mr. Eric Reinhardt. Eric, how are you doing today?
Doing real well. Hey, we usually have a bigger column or a bigger panel, but I know, Rob was in Los Angeles last night, and I just want to say that it was really good to see him make it back to pay-per-view in a role other than as an adult film actor.
And that is the truth. I have to agree 100%. It is good to see him back doing pay-per-views that is not adult film related. Speaking of that, if you missed the Glory pay-per-view event last night, definitely go to the MMAcorner.com. You'll find Rob's recap. You'll find all of the video highlights from the event on the site, so definitely go. Make sure that you check it out. Same thing if you missed World Series of Fighting last night, also another great event. We do have the recaps up. All the full video highlights are on the site, so definitely get to the MMAcorner.com and check that stuff out. In all actuality, it was kind of a slow week this week. There wasn't a whole lot of news going on, but the news that came out this week was huge, and we're gonna start right off swimming in the big boy pool. Viacom broke a rumor a few weeks ago, essentially stating that them and Bjorn Rebney kind of had different philosophies on how they wanted to move forward with Bellator. Well, over the course of time, the two of them could not come to any kind of agreement, and so with that being said, it was announced this week that Bjorn Rebney has left Bellator, is no longer the CEO or president of the organization. The chief operating officer, Mr. Tom Anderson, also left Bellator, and Viacom replaced Bjorn with Scott Coker. Now, this is huge. I have to be honest. Immediately following that announcement, they announced that they're doing away with the tournament format, and they are going to go to more matchmaking type promotions. So, Eric, first off, give me your thoughts on Bjorn stepping down and being replaced with Scott Coker.
You're right in that this is a big deal just because it's a well-known or a reasonably well-known promotion making a pretty big change to their executive structure. And the first thing that you have to say is this is sort of the consequence that executives can face, especially or even ones that help build companies from the ground up. When instead of just having like a hedge fund supporting you financially, you've got somebody a big multinational vertically integrated corporation like Viacom that if you're not doing the bottom line, they can just get rid of you like that because it's all about the stockholders. So that's kind of the first observation I have about this. But the second one really is, I had a hard time really kind of getting excited or shocked or whatever about this news. I was trying to draw a comparison here, and not to minimize non-UFC promotions, but it's sort of like if, in the pro wrestling world, there used to be, more competition. There was WWF, then E, WCW, and then there was a small regional promotion, mostly in Philadelphia. They traveled to New York, mostly in the Northeast, called ECW. Super hardcore fans, like really dedicated fan base, and they were run by a guy named Paul Heyman who really had a good sense of how to run a promotion from a storytelling standpoint. Unfortunately, the business portion of running a business caught up with him. Ultimately, he ended up selling to WWE, who now sort of has this big, I don't want to say monopoly, but they're pretty much the main player, just as the UFC is in the world of mixed martial arts. So what I'm trying to get at here is I compare this to Paul Heyman, former head of ECW, being hired by TNA, which is really the WWE's only network television having competition. It's a good move for that promotion just because you've got a guy with a lot of experience who has run a successful, albeit not sort of as dominant of a promotion as UFC, but still one that ended up on Showtime. And one that did very well for itself, considering it just started as kind of a regional promotion in Northern California. So it's exciting for Bellator, but I'm not sure if this is sort of like the game-changing move that is going to change the outlook of MMA generally speaking. I think Scott Coker is doing a good thing by doing away with the tournament format. I mean, it was unique, and it initially made Bellator stand out from sort of the rest of the promotions, but ultimately it didn't really make for better fights necessarily. And I think what Scott Coker is probably going to continue to do is put together cards that sort of followed the same relatively successful formula that Strikeforce did back when he was leading that, and that is to say, and I think I alluded to this a couple of episodes ago, one or two title fights, a really important contender fight, and then one or two fights featuring guys that fans just want to see, throw down. And so, Josh, let me ask you a question here. In my opinion, it doesn't really matter. It matters who's running the company, but it really matters who's fighting for the company. So my question to you is, who can Scott Coker draw to Bellator that can actually make them a competitor, not a competitor, but somebody who can continue to bring in the kind of numbers that Bellator would like to see now with Scott Coker at the helm?
That's an excellent question, and one of the things. I know Scott Coker very well. I've done a lot of work with him when he was at Strikeforce and all of that kind of stuff. One of the things that I will say about Scott Coker is he is a people person. He is a fighter person. Fighters want to fight for this guy. And I'm not going to throw out names of who he can get, because if we're just being honest, so much of that is going to boil down to dollars.
Right.
At the end of the day, fighters are fighting for money. This is their profession. This is how they feed their family. And anyone who tells you otherwise is just lying to you. These guys need to get paid, just like I need to get paid when I go to my day job. That's how I support my family. So it is who's going to be able to pay these guys the most. And if Viacom, because they have billions of dollars, wants to pony up the cash to get some of these elite level fighters, they can certainly do that. But one guy I'm going to throw out right off the bat is the guy who pretty much started this whole thing and really was essentially the end of Bjorn with Bellator, and that's Eddie Alvarez. Immediately following the hiring of Scott Coker, Eddie Alvarez came out and said, you know what, I'm going to rethink things. I'm not immediately leaving Bellator. Because based on Eddie's contract right now, his next fight with Mike Chandler, that completes his Bellator obligation, regardless of anything else, whether he wins, loses, draws, it doesn't matter. He is done contractually with Bellator. Now, he originally, if it was still going to be Bjorn running the show, he was headed to the UFC. That was a no-brainer. He has now said that he is going to sit down with his management, Glenn Robinson and Scott Coker, and they're going to see if they can come up with a deal that's best suited to keep him in Bellator. And if they can continue to keep guys like Eddie Alvarez, then there are going to be the guys like Gilbert Melendez and the other guys in the UFC that are going to say, you know what, Bellator can pay me. I'm going to go over here and compete just the same. And so I do think that Scott Coker can bring the guys because people want to fight for him. He is a great guy to work for. You pick up the phone right now and call him, he's going to answer. He's going to answer, and he's going to do his best to deal with your problems. And that's something that you're not going to get with other guys. So I think Scott Coker is I think he's going to do good for Bellator. I think he probably was the right choice. Do you disagree?
No, I think absolutely he's the right choice. I mean, again, looking back at the successful MMA promotions that have tried to at least siphon some of the success that the UFC has had, I mean, you can't really think of anybody that's had more success than Scott Coker. You could, I suppose, point at the folks who were running Elite XC, but the way that all kind of crashed and burned after they, were able to build it up and get on CBS, I think that sort of showed maybe that they didn't have as much experience as people thought. But I think Scott Coker is certainly the best choice for this, given that he was sort of, who knows what Scott Coker was up to in between Strikeforce and now, but he certainly wasn't running an MMA promotion, and obviously the fact that he took the job, I'm sure Viacom offered him quite a bit of money to come back from his extended vacation and take the reins, and I can't possibly think of a better person outside of the guys who founded it to take the reins at this point?
Well, I can think of one person that who knows, if you're willing to gamble on him, he could pay big dividends. But we'll get to that in just 1 second. Real quickly, I want to go back to the tournament format. That is one of the things that has always made Bellator unique. And Bjorn Rebney is a good friend of mine, and we've talked about all kinds of stuff. But one of the things that he and I would consistently talk about is UFC 1, 2, 3, when guys were fighting multiple fights in a night, having a true tournament. You really do have to win 3, 4 fights in a night to get that victory. And that is something that I know Bjorn was always hopeful that he could do. That's why he went with the tournament style, because he wanted to bring back the old school roots. And that's really what made Bellator. Champions aren't, or title shots aren't given, they're earned. And so now that we're no longer going to see the tournament format with Bellator, there's nothing unique about them. They're now the same as everybody else. They're the same as RFA. They're the same as MFC. Is this going to hurt them, or is this going to be able to give them the push to put them over the next level, to truly be like a Strikeforce and truly be a true competitor to the UFC?
Well, I think calling any promotion a competitor to the UFC is inaccurate. I mean, the UFC is the NFL, they're the NBA. I mean, just to put a finer point on it,
yeah,
a few weeks ago we talked about Bellator's quote-unquote successful 100,000 person buy rate for their initial pay-per-view. Rumors were circulated this week that UFC 174 got about that number, and it was if that ends up being true, that would be considered an abject disaster. So I think that, we're obviously talking about different scales here, because where Bellator is very satisfied and in fact probably proud of 100,000 pay-per-view buys, for the UFC 100,000 is about the basement level that you can go without them probably needing to clean house and really rethink things from a pay-per-view standpoint. I don't think this will hurt the company getting rid of the tournament format. I don't know that it will necessarily help the company either. What Scott Coker needs to do to make Bellator more successful, or at least maintain its level of success that the folks that preceded him built, is make their cards attractive to people who are just MMA fans, or who are curious about MMA in general. Obviously, not all of Bellator's cards, and in fact, very few of them are going to be on pay-per-view. And I think that's the big difference that we see between Bellator and some of these other developmental or quote-unquote regional promotions, is that they have kind of the big highly promoted deal with Spike TV. That's a decent promotional vehicle behind it. So I think back again to 5-6 years ago when Strikeforce was still around, putting on shows on Showtime, and I'd get together with a handful of my buddies on Saturday night because Strikeforce was on. We knew we could get together, not have to pay $55 to watch a card, and knew that with the stacked nature of the Strikeforce cards, and again, this is what I'm hoping Scott Coker continues to do with Bellator's cards. We knew that we were in for a good night of fights, and even if it wasn't the greatest card of all time, we would still get together, have a few beers, watch some some pretty good fights. And I think that's the best that Bellator can hope for now, is that people will tune in because they know that they are in for a decent night of fights that they don't have to pony up additional dollars for. And I think that's really the goal that Scott Coker should have, is just making their product as attractive as possible to people who just want to see a good night of fights.
Yeah, I agree 100%. A couple of things. First off, you're right. There is no competitor to the UFC. The UFC is top dog, and other promotions aren't even standing in their shadows because they're not even close enough to get there. So you are absolutely right there. Now, I have not talked to Scott Coker personally since he has been announced as president. Now, he is not CEO of Bellator. He is just the president. So I've not talked to him, but I have talked to some of his people, and I have talked to some people within the Spike organization, and here's what they're telling me. The tournament format is gone, and the weekly seasons are gone. What they're going to do now is go to more of a monthly event, just like the UFC is doing. They're going to do at least 12 events a year, and it is going to be a monthly event, and they are going to do their very best to make all of these cards stacked, and they're going to do their best to throw their best fights available on each one of these cards. So it's not going to be any tournament series with just some fillers from the local fighters in that area just to fill out the card. They're actually going to have a full roster. They have a number in mind of the talent that they want to get, and they're going to start signing guys, and they're going to move forward with doing monthly shows, and I think that's great. I do. I think that's great. All right. Last thing related to this before we move on. Now, first off, before I even throw this out here, I want to say there is absolutely no truth to this whatsoever. But this is MMA.
With that caveat.
and I don't know, people like to start rumors, and it gives us stuff to talk about. But I do think that with what I'm about to bring up, if it were actually true, I mean, there would be some teeth to this. I said, and Eric, you said too, that we thought that Scott Coker was the right choice to replace Bjorn. I want to throw one other person out there that, again, if you were willing to gamble on this guy, the dividends probably would pay tenfold, and that's Chael Sonnen. You know, Chael Sonnen right now he's everybody's favorite. Whether you love him or you hate him, everybody wants to be a part of what this guy has going on. And there are all the rumors about how, you know, years down the line, he could be the guy to replace Dana White. And there were rumors that Bellator had reached out to Chael before they'd reached out to Scott Coker. I want to let you know that the people I've talked to within Viacom and within Spike say that that's absolutely not true. They never reached out to Chael Sonnen in any way, that Scott Coker was their number one choice. But for the sake of argument, what if they would have contacted Chael Sonnen? I mean, honestly, how good do you think Chael could run an MMA organization, whether it be the UFC or Bellator or whatever?
You remember when Isaiah Thomas was given the reins to the CBA and
Yes.
then to the New York Knicks and the Toronto Raptors and just totally torpedoed every single one of those?
Yes.
This is the sort of situation we're talking about here. I think just because a guy's good at talk, like he's, you know, good on the stick, as they say, and he's, you know, a decent fighter who's been a company guy, that in no way qualifies him to run a billion-dollar company. I think at best we could hope that he would be a public type of figurehead that the UFC or whoever could trot out at public events and be like, hey, I'm Chael Sonnen, and here's a bunch of shtick that I do because I'm Chael Sonnen. And buy the next UFC pay-per-view event because it's going to be awesome, an American Gangster or whatever. But I think to actually put, you know, major business decisions in his hands, and, you know, no disrespect to the guy, I think there would be, here's what would happen. They would give him a bunch of power, and he and his people would make probably some crap decisions, and he'd be out of there within a year. Again, he's a very popular guy, a person who people like to see on camera, but I think that is the extent of the role that he should play within an MMA promotion, is that of a promoter in the literal sense of the word, and that he goes out and he talks up the big fights, rather than somebody who actually has a hand in the business machinations behind the scenes.
Yeah, I have to agree with you 100%. And first off, let me say that I'm a huge Chael Sonnen supporter. I love the guy. He cracks me up. If he was a comedian, I would go buy a ticket to a show because the guy's hilarious. He really is.
That's a good idea. You know, he could probably do a one-man show just talking about his career and his like legal peccadillos in like Las Vegas and Los Angeles and New York and maybe one or two other places. I think that would actually sell.
You know, I really do. I think he's hilarious, and I think he could be a stand-up comedian. It's kind of like you were talking about the WWE earlier, The Rock. I'm not a huge WWE guy. I was when I was a kid, but as an adult, just kind of don't follow it anymore. But The Rock, when he would do his interviews and, just running his mouth, he always made me laugh. He was another guy that, I always thought, all right, if he's a comedian, I'm buying a ticket to a show because I want to hear what he has to say. Chael Sonnen is that guy. Everyone wants to hear what he has to say. The problem is maybe 50% of what he has to say is actual fact. And when that...
Go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say, and when that's the case, that's probably not the guy that you want running your business. Now, Dana White, whether you love him or hate him, he tells us a lot of stories. There's no question about that. But when Dana says something, at the time he says it, he actually believes it to be true.
You're right.
He's not just making stuff up. Now, it doesn't always turn out to be true, but when he gives us that bit of information at that time in his head, that's what he thinks. Now, with Chael, he feeds us stuff like a chef feeds, their customer soups. He just gives it to us to give it to us. Now, whether or not it's true is different. And so, with that being said, yes, he's a guy that you want. As the owner of the MMA Corner, if Chael Sonnen came to me and said, Josh, I want to be the face of the MMA Corner, I'd be all over it. I'd sign him up in a heartbeat, have him out there running his mouth. Then
I'm hurt that you would choose Chael Sonnen over me.
And then if he came to me and said, Josh, I want to run your business, I'd have to tell him, Chael, that's not in the cards for you, because that's just not what he does. So I have to agree with you 100%, Eric. I think he would be a great guy to have as your mouth, but he's not the brains behind the operation.
Wasn't he convicted of fraud?
Yes.
Like real estate fraud or something, pled guilty or something like that? So there's also that to consider.
He got plead guilty to real estate fraud, and I don't know all the facts about that, but I will tell you this: Chael came out and was pretty honest about the unethical business dealings that he did, and yeah, he was definitely guilty. There's no question about that. He bought some property and sold it unethically and whatnot, and him and his business partners went down for that without question. All right. Now, this is a MMA news show. Trust me, it's not all about Bellator and that kind of stuff. There are other things going on. And a big fight was announced this week, one that I'm actually looking forward to. And that's Gegard Mousasi versus Jacare Souza. They're going to be the co-main event at UFC 176 on August 2nd in Los Angeles. Now, way back in the day, these guys, fought and dream and that kind of stuff. But I want to get your thoughts on this, Eric. Both of these guys are trying to basically put their stamp down and say, you know what, I'm the next contender for the 185-pound title. Does the winner of this fight deserve a title shot? And give me your thoughts. What do you think of this fight overall?
Well, at first, given the amount of fame and attention that kind of the top 5 middleweights get, talking Chris Weidman and Anderson Silva and Lyoto Machida and Vitor Belfort, albeit maybe not for the best reasons. I think that this fight is sort of a hidden gem almost. When I first read it, I was like, yeah, okay, decent co-main event. But then, as I was doing a little bit more research so we could talk about this, it turns out that these guys have some fantastic resumes, and I think that the winner very much deserves to be in consideration for the next title shot. Let me break it down a little bit for you. These are two guys that have 65 pro fights between them and only 7 losses. That is impressive.
Yes, it is.
That is very impressive. Even considering the level of talent that is required to get to where they're at in the UFC. 65 fights, 7 losses. Jacare has the more impressive recent record. I think he's got 6 straight wins coming into this fight against Mousasi. But, honestly, between the two of them, he's probably the more one-dimensional fighter. Now, albeit that one dimension is some of the best one-dimensional, grappling in the world, that being the dimension that I'm referring to here. He is one of the best MMA grapplers in the sport of mixed martial arts. But, looking at his record again, he has the vast majority of his victories coming by submission, which I don't want to say, creates some suspicion about his stand-up game, but when you're talking about going against a guy like Mousasi, who's got, I think, 18 wins by knockout or technical knockout, he's going to need to shore up all areas of his game, Jacare that is, before he's able to, I think, really be able to stand with a guy like Mousasi again. Mousasi, if not for losses to King Mo and to Lyoto Machida, I think he would be considered one of, if not the best fighter in the world, just because of the amount of success that he's had. Unfortunately, those are two fairly big setbacks, and especially considering the recency of his loss to Machida, I think that has impacted how he is viewed among his fellow middleweights. He is ranked 7th right now. Jacare is 4th. And because we've got a little bit of time, I thought we could actually kind of break down the rest of the top 7, so to speak. Anderson Silva is number 1. Obviously, he's lost to Chris Weidman twice, and he's coming back from that injury, so he's probably not getting a title shot anytime soon. Number 2 is Vitor Belfort, whose regulatory status kind of remains in limbo for the time being. Number 3 is Machida, who's getting the next title shot at UFC 175. Number 4 is Jacare. So I think given the folks between Jacare and Chris Weidman right now, if Jacare is able to be successful against Gegard Mousasi, then I think he definitely deserves a shot at the middleweight title. Beneath him is Luke Rockhold, who's hurt right now. And number 6 is Tim Kennedy, who's obviously won 4 straight. I think there's been some articles this week that C.B. Dalloway wants to fight him next. And then, of course, underneath him is Gegard Mousasi, who a win over Jacare would only be his 2nd in a row. So I think if Jacare is able to win again, I think he is definitely in line for the next title shot. Mousasi, on the other hand, as much as I'd like to see him in a title fight, the fact that he lost to Machida, and Machida is obviously one of the best fighters of all time, but I think that still has kind of put a damper on things. I'd like to personally see him take on either C.B. Dalloway or Tim Kennedy if those two don't end up hooking up in the octagon. So I think Jacare, if he wins, definitely deserves a shot at the title. Mousasi, I'm not so sure. I think he'd probably need one more win to really cement his status as a title contender. And to be truthful, I think he is probably going to defeat Jacare, and then we'll probably see him, if not in a title fight himself, certainly against another member of the middleweight top 5.
Well, first off, let's talk about Mousasi. He finds himself in a very precarious position. Let's say he gets a dominant victory over Jacare, just beats the crap out of him. If Machida defeats Weidman, and Machida's our 185-pound champion, the UFC is going to make Mousasi fight a couple more times before they give him that rematch.
Yeah.
First off, that fight was not exciting, but the fight that did happen, Mousasi was not on Machida's level. So he's definitely going to have to prove to the UFC that he can win that fight. And right now, I don't think the UFC thinks he can. I don't see the UFC giving him a title shot. Now, if Machida loses and it's Weidman, that's a different story because matchup styles, that kind of stuff, make fights. So it's a different case there. Now, if Jacare wins, based on everything you just said, yes, I certainly think that he's probably going to be the guy who gets the next title shot. Luke Rockhold, I have serious issues with Luke Rockhold because here's the thing. The guy's always calling out Vitor, which is fine. You want to get that rematch. But you've said it so many times, now you just look silly. If the UFC wants to make that fight, they will. If they've basically, by not making it already, have let you know, shut up and move on. Now he's calling out Michael Bisping. You're ranked number 6, isn't that what you said, right? Number 6 for Luke Rockhold, or is it number 5?
Luke Rockhold is 5.
Okay, you're number 5. Why are you calling out Michael Bisping? You're ranked number 5. You need to be calling out the 4 guys ahead of you. You know what? Anderson Silva is basically expected to be ready to fight in December. You're injured right now. Call out Anderson. Someone ranked ahead of you that's going to get you closer to a title shot. You talk about wanting to be a champion. beating Michael Bisping's not going to get you a title shot. You need to start calling out some real fighters. Call out people that are truly above you. And the fact that he doesn't do that makes me think that maybe deep down inside, he might not be a real fighter. And I'm not knocking him or anything. I'm just saying that at this point in time, you're the number 5 ranked guy in your division. You need to be calling out the people above you so you can get a title shot, not people that are scraping the bottom of the barrel. So with that being said, going back to Mousasi and Jacare, I do think that Jacare gets that victory. He deserves a title shot. Mousasi, depending on how things play out, and that's another fight I wouldn't mind seeing, is Rockhold and Mousasi. I think they match up very well together. I think there's a lot on the line for that fight, so we'll see how it goes. But going back to CB Dollaway, look at the people he's calling out. People ranked above him. Asking to fight Tim Kennedy, who's ranked number 6. Asking to fight Gegard Mousasi, who's ranked number 7. That's how you work your way up the ladder, by calling out people who are ranked above you, not below you. Just a thought. All right, moving on. Final topic of the day, and this is another intriguing fight to me. First off, when I heard about it, I was surprised that one of these fighters took the fight, because it's really a no-win situation for her. But former Strikeforce champion, UFC title contender Miesha Tate is going to take on undefeated Queen of Pancrase, Renaki, at what is it? It's Fight Night 52 on September 20th in Japan. Now, a lot of people out there have been talking about Renaki's MMA record as not being that good, but this woman is on a tear right now. She got a recent victory over Tara LaRosa, and Tara is no slouch. Then she got another victory over Sarah Diallo, who is also no slouch. I was surprised that Miesha took this fight for the simple fact that, like I said, it's a no-win situation for her. It's a fight that she should win, but she's going to some other girl's backyard. She's got to make the long travel to Japan, get accustomed to the Japanese time zone, all of that kind of stuff, and take this fight with everything to lose. If she loses this fight, I mean, her UFC career essentially could be done. So it's a big risk for her against an opponent over here that, if you're not paying attention, you probably don't know much about her. But she is the real deal. She's got all the skills, and if Miesha's not taking this seriously, she's going to get her butt handed to her. So what do you think of this fight, Eric?
Well, the topic was worded interestingly this morning when I got your email, and it said, some people have questioned Rin Nake's record, and I was expecting to go and look on SureDog and look up her fighter record and see like 8-10 or something like that. But no. 16-0, like that's pretty good. And I think the distinction that needs to be made here is that women's MMA is still probably 10 years behind at least men's MMA in terms of the depth of the divisions. And so, if you want to talk about quality of opposition, I mean, Miesha Tate, early in her career before she got to Strikeforce, she's not really fighting world-class fighters either. So I think that, when we're talking about female fighters, I think a little bit more leeway can be given, especially when we're talking about somebody who has won all 16 of her professional fights and is the current Queen of Pancrase.
They've been dominant.
Yeah. And, just like we were talking about with the last topic with Mousasi and Jacare, on paper maybe this one doesn't look so exciting, but when you really look into it, I'm looking forward to this fight. I think, first of all, it's a great fight for the Japanese audience because they've got, the current reigning Queen of Pancrase, who probably has, more than a little bit of cachet over in Japan, taking on probably the second most well-known female MMA fighter in the world. So it's a great move for the UFC. It's a great move to get them to draw in a lot of fans because they don't go to Japan that often, and so they obviously want to give people a reason to come. So if they put the Queen of Pancrase against no disrespect to other fighters in the UFC women's bantamweight division, but some kind of mid-carder who not very many Japanese fans are familiar with, as opposed to Miesha Tate, who, you know, had a big shining spotlight on her for a long time. I think it's a great move for the UFC. It's a great move for the card. You know, Miesha Tate has already lost to Ronda Rousey 2 times, and neither fight was particularly close. So, you know, unless Rousey cleans out absolutely everybody in the division at the same time that Miesha Tate wins, like, you know, 3, 4, 5, 6 fights in a row, probably, you know, towards a higher number in that range, her title aspirations are probably behind her at this point. So the best she can hope for is a number of featured bouts where she can extend her fame, keep being, you know, at the center of the MMA camera for, you know, 15 or 25 minutes, depending on, I suppose, when the fight is, and kind of maintain her position as one of, you know, she's not the champion, but she's still, again, one of the most highly regarded and well-known fighters in the UFC. I don't think if she loses this fight that she's done in the UFC. I mean, we're talking about somebody who just came off a win against Liz Carmouche, who herself challenged for the title. So, you know, we're not talking about Miesha Tate being in a big career skid here. So that combined, again, with her drawing power, because if you recall, her second fight against Ronda Rousey, sure, Rousey's still the big star in women's MMA, but it was Tate that was getting all the cheers from the audience at the end of that fight, even in her losing effort. So people like her. People like to watch her fight. And, you know, from a promotional standpoint, it's a perfect move to put her in a high-profile fight in Japan against one of the better-known Japanese fighters in the UFC. Yeah, I think, again, Tate, I think, still has a long career ahead of her in the UFC unless we start seeing her lose 3 or 4 fights in a row, at which point, obviously, they're going to reconsider their position. But I think she's given enough to the UFC between, you know, the great fight she had against Kat Zingano, the fact that she stepped in for Zingano then as a coach on The Ultimate Fighter, and, you know, has really been a company fighter, so to speak. So that goes a long way for the UFC brass. And so unless Miesha Tate really starts losing a bunch in a row, I think that her career in the UFC will continue.
All right. First off, all the MMA pundits out there that are questioning her 16-0 record, go out and YouTube her, Google her, watch this girl. This girl's legit. She has legitimate skills. She is vicious. Now, granted, some of the fights she has probably were against cans, but that's to be said regardless. And again, when your pool of opponents isn't that big to choose from, you can't knock her. At least she has 16 fights to her credit. We have tons of girls on the UFC roster that don't have 16 fights to their credit. So the fact that she's in there fighting, I don't care if she beat up the same girl 16 straight times. She's been in there getting it done, and you got to respect that. And this girl has talent. So if you haven't seen her, go check her out. I do think that she matches up very well against Miesha. I think she's going to give Tate everything she can handle and then some. And when we do the breakdown show, I'll let you know who I'm going to pick to win this fight. But I'm very excited about it. I think it's a great fight for the UFC. I think it does everything that Eric said that it's going to do. For the Japanese fan, this gives them something to get up about, because when their golden child puts a beat down on Miesha Tate, I mean, immediately she can be talking about how she should be getting the next title shot. Whether or not that's the way it plays out is yet to be seen. But you beat Miesha Tate and you're automatically on the map, you know. And so this is a huge fight. This is a great fight to have over in Japan for the Japanese public there. I think the UFC is doing smart things.
Tate by decision.
You're going Tate by decision.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Are we going to do topic of the week this week? We didn't really address that before the show. I apologize for.
That's okay. We are. I was going to throw it over to you right now, actually. So with that being said, final thoughts, Eric. What's up?
Cool. Well, hey, you know, this weekend is one of the few this summer without a UFC event going on. So, you know, as a guy who, you know, prefers to sit on his couch most nights as opposed to take advantage of the many, you know, activities in my neighborhood, I was wondering what to do. And then I remembered, oh yeah, Glory. They're having a Last Man Standing pay-per-view event on Saturday night. And, you know, as a guy who I would still very much call myself a beginning practitioner of kickboxing, I've learned to appreciate the art a little bit more over the last, I would say, year. And so, you know, seeing the best fighters in the world, or some of the best fighters in the world certainly, compete in a one-night tournament, man, that's truly, you know, tough man defining, because it takes enough to just fight once and, you know, train for 6 months or however long and get in the ring or get in the cage and throw down one time. But for guys like Artem Levin, who won the middleweight tournament last night, to get in there and fight 3 fights in one night and, you know, still look pretty good in the last chunk of the third fight, that's some impressive athleticism. Tonight, there is another paper. Let me backtrack 1 second. This was Glory's pay-per-view debut. I think it went over fantastically. I will, you know, look forward very much to purchasing the next Glory pay-per-view. And then tonight, there is another company making its pay-per-view debut, a little bit off the MMA beaten path here, but I'm talking about Ring of Honor Wrestling. It's a smaller wrestling promotion, again, certainly not of the caliber of WWE in terms of their budget. I like to call WWE Top 40 and Ring of Honor like your small punk rock show. But Ring of Honor makes their pay-per-view debut tonight as well, and with their Best in the World card. Filthy Tom Lawler, I think, will probably be in attendance. He's had some role in Ring of Honor recently. And so, you know, on a weekend when there isn't a big event from the big companies taking place, I'm talking about UFC, I'm talking about WWE, it's nice to see that there are alternatives out there as well that, you know, are certainly worth the price that they're charging. The Glory pay-per-view, I believe, was $35, so, you know, certainly not bank-breaking. Ring of Honor's pay-per-view tonight will be $25. So basically, for the price of a UFC pay-per-view, one could, in theory, get 2 pay-per-views to fill up both weekend nights. So, you know, again, pay attention to the other stuff that's out there, because, you know, as we repeatedly say on this show, there's more to combat sports than just the UFC, and even to just more than just MMA. So next time Glory makes its way onto your television set, I strongly recommend checking it out, even if it's on Spike, even if it's on pay-per-view. The less frequent sort of alternative combat sports promotions that are out there, you know, outside of the UFC and outside of the WWE and big companies like that can put together shows that are just as good as their big-time competitors.
Yeah, I have to second that. And really, these quote-unquote smaller shows, that's where you see tomorrow's stars today.
Right.
Again, I'm not a huge WWE guy, but Brock Lesnar, John Cena, The Undertaker, all those guys got their start somewhere other than the WWE, you know? And so, yeah, check out these smaller shows, because, again, that's truly where you get to see the diamonds in the rough. And as far as combat sports goes, I know a lot of people out there are like, well, why are you guys talking about wrestling? That's not a sport. Well, I'm here to tell you it is. And, you know, even though it's not my thing and I don't watch it, those guys are athletes. I mean, if you've ever been to an event, yes, wrestling is scripted. And the fact that who gets pinned or who submits or who gets counted out, whatever, is predetermined. All that other stuff, most of that is legit. No, they're not hitting each other, but when you jump off the top rope onto somebody's knees with your stomach, you can't fake that. You know, that is legitimate. When those guys are slamming each other through tables, guys, they're not fake tables. They're the same tables that I have my computer sitting on right now. They hurt. That stuff is legitimate. Those guys are athletes. Yes, it is scripted, but those guys are athletes just the same. So if that's your thing, definitely check it out, you know, and do so.
Violent ballet is what I call it. Violent ballet.
There you go. That's a perfect way to describe it. Violent ballet. My final thought is very simple. I'm going to go back to Bellator. MMA. Well, combat sports in general is a business, whether it's boxing, whether it's MMA, whether it's wrestling. It is all business. And sometimes you have to make tough business decisions. It's not personal. It's business. And it's all about what is best for the business. And in Viacom's mind, they felt parting ways with Bjorn Rebney was best for business. So 2 parts to that. First off, Bjorn, I want to wish you the very best of luck in whatever it is that you do in the future, not only from myself, but all of us at the MMA Corner. We've always respected what you have done for, again, not only myself, but everybody associated with the MMA Corner. So from all of us to Bjorn Rebney, we want to wish you the very best and hope that, if you do start another promotion, that you are very successful with that. Now, moving on to Bellator, Viacom. Again, sometimes you have to make the tough decisions, and they're not the easy ones to make. And whether you agree with the decision or you don't agree with it, I do give Viacom props for, making the decision that they wanted to make, not being pushed around by anybody, making the decision that they thought was best for their company. And again, whether or not anyone agrees with it is irrelevant. You have to respect the fact that they were willing to do what they thought was best for them. So with that being said, I want to wish Bellator and Scott Coker the best of luck. As an MMA journalist, as an MMA fan, I always look for parity. I always look for great competition. And there are so many things out there available to us in the MMA community, and I hope that Bellator is able to continue to move forward and continue to give fans quality fights that we've come accustomed to. Because, again, as an MMA journalist and an MMA fan, I rely on Bellator. That's my Friday night fix. I rely on having their fights and having them as a great promotion. So, again, I want to wish them the utmost luck, and hopefully they have great success. All right, guys, a couple of housekeeping notes. The MMA Corner prediction show will be back next Thursday night. We will be giving you our thoughts and predictions. Well, I'll tell you what, guys, we're going to double it up. We're going to give you thoughts and predictions on both UFC Fight Night 43, Tahuna versus Marquardt, which is on Fight Pass next week in the 28th, and then we're going to do UFC Fight Night 44, Swanson versus Stevens, which will be on Fight Pass and Fox Sports 1, also 6/28. So next Thursday we're going to double it up. We're going to give you predictions on both. Then we will be back on 6/28 recapping the event. So definitely make sure that you tune in. All right, fans, that is our show. For Eric Reiner, I am Josh Davis. Until next week, keep living the MMA Corner lifestyle.